Hello guys, today I'm going to analyze 3 more companies in the gas and oil industry. The first company is Exxon, the second company is Marathon, and the third one is Schlumberger. I'll be discussing their financial statements and providing you with my opinion. An opinion which you may take into consideration. Let us firstly talk about their respective share price and their respective earnings. The first company is ExxonMobil, and from Yahoo Finance we can see that this company has beaten all 4 of its quarterly earnings last year. And the expectations for its first quarterly earning is higher than the expectation for its first quarterly earning last year. In terms of the share price, the company at the beginning of the pandemic was at 62 and it reached a peak of 87. The next company is Marathon Oil Corporation. And from Yahoo Finance, we can see that this company has also beaten all 4 of its quarterly earnings last year. And the estimate for its first quarterly earning this year is greater than the estimate for its first quarterly earning last year. In terms of the share price, the company at the beginning of the pandemic was at 11.37 and it reached a peak of 26. Lastly, Schlumberger. From Yahoo Finance, we can see that Schlumberger bet its second, third, and fourth quarterly earning last year. And unfortunately, we don't have its first quarterly earning for last year. In terms of the share price, the company at the beginning of the pandemic was at 33 and it reached a peak of 43. Let us now discuss their respective financial statements. The first financial statement belongs to Exxon. The first thing I'd like to point out is the equity. As we can see, Exxon experienced a decline in equity. In 2020, equity was at 198 billion, and in 2022 it fell to 175 billion. This fall in equity can be explained by the decrease in long-term assets and the decrease in current liabilities. In 2020, long-term assets were at around 310 billion and they fell to 279 billion in 2022. Similarly, current liabilities fell from 63 billion in 2020 to 56 billion in 2022. Now from this, it seems that ExxonMobil is selling their long-term assets. They're selling the PPE, which no longer generates in revenue to the company, and they're using the cash from the sale in order to pay back their loans, their short-term loans. So this fall in equity is not necessarily a bad thing in this case. What I'm concerned about is their financial activity. ExxonMobil drastically increased its financial activity. In 2020, the financial activity was at negative 6 billion, and this increased to negative 35 billion 423 million in 2022. This increase is too high for the company. The company is over gratifying their shareholders. Their income and their cash is not high enough for such large financial activity. And what I'd like to see in the future is a reduction in financial activity. Instead of spending all of that money on shares, they could further improve their financial statement. For example, they could use the cash they're spending on financial activity to reduce their liabilities and improve equity. That is all I have to say about Exxon. Let us now move on to the next company. The next company is MRO. And here we can see that the company did not experience a significant increase in revenue during this time period. Revenue rose from 5,190 million to 5,467 million. This is a small increase, and we'd like to see a larger increase in revenue in the future. MRO experienced a decline in equity, just like Exxon. Equity fell from 12 billion to 10,686 million in 2022. This fall in equity can be explained by the decline in long-term assets. Long-term assets fell from 18 billion in 2020 to around 15 billion in 2022. It seems like the company may be selling the PPE, which no longer generates revenue. Unfortunately, unlike Exxon, they're not using the cash from the sale in order to reduce their current liabilities. Their current liabilities are too high. The ratio between the current assets and current liabilities is not high enough, and it needs to be improved. The company needs to reduce its current liabilities, and it needs to stop selling its current assets, and it needs to increase it instead. This would not only improve the ratio between the assets and liabilities, but it would also improve equity. What I'm concerned about is their financial activity. The company's cash fell from 858 million to 580 million, but their financial activity rose drastically. It rose from negative 535 million to negative 2,391 million in 2022. This is a drastic increase in financial activity, and it needs to be reduced. The company does not have high enough income nor cash in order to sustain such large financial activity. Instead of overspending on their shares, they could use the cash in order to reduce their current liabilities, for example, in order to improve their financial statement. This rise in financial activity is unlikely to lead in a drastic increase in share price because the company's financial statement is just not strong enough in order to support a higher share price right now. And I wouldn't bet on an increase in share price from their financial activity. In any case, let us now move on to the third company, Schlumberger. An immediate concern in Schlumberger's financial statement is their revenue. Their revenue drastically fell in 2020. Revenue was at 32,917 million and it fell to 22,929 million. This is highly concerning for us as investors, and we want to see an increase in revenue in the future. Schlumberger also experienced a drastic fall in equity. Equity fell from 24 billion in 2020 to 15 billion in 2022. This drastic fall in equity can be explained by the fall in current assets and in long-term assets. Current assets fell from 15 billion to 12,654 million in 2022. And long-term assets fell from 41 billion in 2020 to around 39 billion in 2022. These are significant decreases in assets, and it's highly concerning to us. The company needs to increase its current assets and it needs to increase its long-term assets. The third thing I'm concerned about is their financial activity. Their financial activity fell from negative 3,718 million to 2,824 million in 2022. Although it fell by such a large amount, financial activity is still too high for this company. Their income and cash is not high enough to sustain such large financial activity. And instead of overspending on their shares, they could use the cash in order to improve their financial statement, in order to reduce their current liabilities further, and in order to improve their equity. The last thing I'd like to say about Schlumberger is that the company invested a lot of money into Russia. Now that Russia is at war with Ukraine, it's unlikely that they'll see a return in their investments. For that reason, I recommend investors to wait. If you are thinking about buying Schlumberger, you should wait for their next annual statement in order to see how the company will manage the loss from the significant loss from their Russian investments. The current financial statement I'm analyzing, where these financial statements were released before the war, and I sincerely recommend investors to wait for their next annual statement before they decide to invest in this company. In any case, let us now rate both companies. Finally, let us now review the three companies. I'm going to place Exxon in the careful section. The company is overspending on their shares. I'd like to see a reduction in financial activity. And I would also like to see a further improvement in the current liabilities ratio in the company. This would improve their equity and it would reduce their short-term loans. If they do this, then I might place them in the OK section, but for now they're in the careful section. MRO is going to be placed in the careful section as well. The company needs to experience a larger increase in revenue. They need to reduce their financial activity. And I'd like to see a decline in current liabilities and an increase in current assets from the company. If they do all of this successfully, then I might place them in the OK section. But for now, they are in the careful section. Schlumberger is going to be placed in the trash section. As I've mentioned before, the company had large investments in Russia. It's highly unlikely they will receive a return from these investments. Their revenue has also declined significantly during the period I analyzed, and it's likely that the revenue could fall even more in the future. The company is also over-gratifying their shareholders. They need to reduce their financial activity even more. I'd also like to see an increase in current assets from the company and a decrease in current liabilities. If they do this, then they might be placed in the careful section. But for now, they stay in the trash section, and I recommend shareholders to wait for their next annual report to see the full loss the company will incur from Russia. In any case, that is all I have to say about the three companies. And in the next video, I plan to go through IBM, Juniper, and NetApp. In any case, hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, give it a like, subscribe, and thank you for watching.